Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kim Havens. I'm the event manager here at An Unlikely Story in Plainville, Massachusetts, and hopefully the rain is going to stay away and the power will stay on. I am delighted to welcome Tracey Enerson Wood to discuss her new book, The War Nurse, with Barbara Conrey. So, before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple items. You can ask your questions in the chat. We will get to those towards the end of the event. And we will also, if you're willing, go ahead and invite you on screen so you can ask your question in person. If you would like to purchase the books, we have a green button right in the center bottom of your screen, and you just go ahead and click on that, and we will send you out your very own copy of The War Nurse or The Engineer's Wife. And Tracy has very kindly signed book plates, so you will get a signed special book plate to go along with it. Tracey Enerson Wood has always had a writing bug. While working as a registered nurse, starting her own interior design company, raising 2 children, and bouncing around the world as a military wife, she indulged in her passion as a playwright, screenwriter, and novelist. She has authored magazine columns and other nonfiction, and written and directed plays of all lengths. A New Jersey native, she now lives with her family in Florida and Germany. She is the author of the USA Today best-selling novel, The Engineer's Wife, and The War Nurse, which is just out this week. Her other passions include food and cooking and honoring our military heroes. The War Nurse takes place during World War I and introduces an historical figure you've probably never heard of, Julia Stimson. Julia was a nurse working in St. Louis, Missouri, and was called to train and ready a team of 64 nurses to go to Rouen, France, to work at a mobile hospital close to the front. It was actually located on a racetrack. The American Red Cross began organizing military hospital units in 1916 in anticipation of the U.S. entry into the war. Julia C. Stimson, director of the Washington University Training School for Nurses, joined other physicians and nurses from St. Louis in forming Base Hospital 21. The unit was one of the first to go overseas after the U.S. entered the war. They sailed from New York in May 1917. Tracy brings this larger than life person to brilliant life in this historical novel, along with those you do know, including Marie Curie and her daughter, Irene. Tracy uses her knowledge of nursing with her considerable research into the fascinating history of medical care in France during World War I. When a troubling new respiratory infection arrives, taking down an entire troop before they have even got to the front, Julia navigates the resistance of the doctors and isolates those who are infected. Her history is so, I went down the rabbit hole of research this afternoon and found out that Julia served as chief nurse of Base Hospital 21 until April 1918, when she was appointed chief nurse of the American Red Cross. 7 months later, she was appointed chief nurse of the American Expeditionary Forces in Paris. For her service in France during the war, the United States government awarded Stimson the Distinguished Service Medal. She returned to the Army during World War II to recruit nurses and was promoted to the rank of full colonel 6 weeks before her death. After reading The War Nurse, yes, I saw photos of her, read her letters. It is completely fascinating, and you are definitely going to want to read it. Joining Tracy this evening is Barbara Conrey, the USA Today best-selling author of Nowhere Near Goodbye, which was published on August 4th, 2020 by Red Adept Publishing. Previously, Barbara worked in the healthcare industry before opting for an early retirement, which lasted all of 3 months. She then accepted a finance position for which she had absolutely no background, and 4 years later, she decided to write a book, but not about finance, thank goodness. Travel is her passion, which hopefully we'll all get to do again soon, along with reading, writing, hiking, and exploring antique shops. Her greatest love is Miss Molly, her rescue beagle. There are stories to be told about beagles, and Barbara hopes to incorporate some of them into her books. And she joins us from Pennsylvania, where she lives close to family and friends. And now it is my great honor, my great pleasure to welcome Tracey Enerson Wood and Barbara Conrey. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Yay!
Thank you. What a nice welcome.
It was beautiful. I'm like, wow,
Yes.
we did all that. That's pretty amazing,
I know,
huh,
right?
Barbara?
You really did a lot. You totally did a lot.
I think I made some of that stuff up.
You guys are amazing.
Well, why not, right?
Right.
I am so happy to be here with you tonight. And the first thing I want to say is thank you so much for sending me a copy of The War Nurse. I absolutely loved it. I know you know that, but I want to say it so everybody knows it because it's fabulous. It was a joy to read. It was a joy to review. And this is just like the icing on the cake for me. So thank you.
Oh,
I
now I'm
really,
gonna cry.
really,
That was, and
that's my goal.
thank you for
It's
writing
always my goal.
thank you for writing the blurb too. I know it's, especially in those early on days, you know how it is. You don't know how people are going to react to this
Yes,
book. It's your baby. You've put so much into it, and
I
you
totally,
start
yes.
sending it out there, and you don't know if people are going to be like.
And that is
really important.
That is one of the best things, I have to say. It's one of the best things about being an author is to be able to write a blurb for another author. It's like a gift.
It is.
So now that we've just, loved each other to death.
That's right. We fawn all over each other.
Yes.
If we, just in case nobody else does.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So I have questions for you.
Oh, okay.
I have never heard of Julia Stimson before reading The War Nurse, and I was totally intrigued. I just fell in love with this character. And I want to know, how did you find her, and why did she become the heart of this book? Tell me.
Well, as a nurse myself, I did it kind of systematically, as I've been taught to think. It's not my natural way of thinking, but that's what I have been taught. And so there were several things. I always knew I wanted to write about a nurse. It's a profession I dedicated decades to, and I know how hard they work, how sometimes misunderstood they are. Just so many things about the profession is really fascinating. They're in and around sometimes amazing things, and they're sometimes just observers. So they have these wonderful stories that just, haven't been so much brought to life because there's not too many nurses who can take the time to really write about them. So I knew I wanted to write about a nurse. And so then I started looking at eras. And I sort of prefer the late 1800s to early 1900s, all the way up to about 1960. And then it ceases to be historical fiction in my mind. So that's, sort of. Yeah, right. Yeah, 1970. I'm sorry, it's not historical fiction. But so anyway, I was looking at eras, and I had just, of course, completed The Engineer's Wife, which ended in 1883. So I thought, let's go a natural progression and look at, a time era after that. So naturally, World War One came to mind for several reasons. Well, one of them being World War II was also, I love to read about World War II. It's a fascinating era, and we have, even though there's lots of books out there, we're only just really starting to unearth some of those amazing stories. But I know there is a lot already written about World War II, and was jumping a little bit too far in ahead. So I was thinking, World War One. There aren't actually that many American oriented books about World War One because our country was only involved in it basically for a year. So there's much, much more about World War II, and there's much more British literature about World War One. But I felt that there was a bit of a gap there. So I thought this is an interesting era. And also there were really many medical and nursing advances that happened during this time. There was also due to advances in weapons, unfortunately, but there was also medical advances not only to treat the awful wounds, but just because it was just a time where a lot of things like that were happening, a lot of discoveries were happening. So a fascinating time appears. Like, okay, so I have a time, I have a nurse. I'm just going to go out there and find the most interesting nurse I can that lived, because I also had never heard of Julia Stimson. Why? I don't know. But anyway, once I found out, here was a chief nurse. She was actually from the same geographic area as my first heroine, Emily Warren Roebling. And, it's very likely that they would have crossed paths because they were, in the same area at the same, some of the same time. So I'm like, oh my gosh, it's almost like Emily would have handed off the
Oh,
torch of
yeah,
forwarding women's roles. And so I could
right,
see her as an inspiration, even though I couldn't find any documentation of them actually, doing this. I imagined it could happen. And so that qualifies
right.
in my mind. So there was that. But when I found all the things she did and her writing, which was so clear and so lovely and so strong and also rather emotional, which is to me a really, really important part of historical fiction, and so we had that, and I really felt like I could get a hold of her voice, so to speak. So
I,
that's why Julia, she just kind of took hold of my heart and did not let go.
I, I think you two were meant for each other. I mean, really, I really think you brought her
Oh,
into our lives, and that is such a gift. I think she would be so happy. I
I hope
really
so.
believe
Yeah,
that. I
I hope
really
so.
believe that because I think in many ways she was misunderstood, and I think maybe she sometimes had a hard time expressing herself. I think I wanted she did so much, and I have to say there was one more thing I wanted for her, which didn't happen, but you know, um, she just would be very happy with how you've portrayed her. I really, the research must have been phenomenal.
Yeah,
But
it was really interesting, and
tell
I
me
have to go ahead.
tell me about your process. Tell me, how do you even, what did you do? Did you read books? Did you talk to people? Did you tour? Did you go to France?
Yeah,
Tell me
well,
all about your
basic.
research.
Kind of all of the above. The very first thing I did was to get a copy of the book her father actually put together. He collected the letters she had sent home
Mhm.
from the war and for some of the months before that. And he had collected it all in a book. I actually have it right here called Finding Themselves, which of course this is a fairly modern reprint of it. But it was the very first thing I did. And through that, I really got to a feeling of her voice, and especially in the beginning, she was very excited, and she was going to go out there and conquer the world. But it was really interesting because it's all in time order, how it changes throughout the time she's with Base Hospital 21, and the things it seems to me that she was hiding more and more things, and so those were things I really wanted to explore. Those that's what you want to get. Then
Mhm.
I also wrote other letters. For example, there was a collection of letters that some of the other physicians had written home during the time. There was one, I can't think of his name right now. I think it might have been a Dr. Veeder, who sent to his wife talking all about Julia and how strong she was and the things she was doing. So that really gave me another perspective of her from the
Uh-huh.
eyes of others. That was really important. But probably the most impactful thing that I did, and I was very, very lucky to have been able to do this, and I was living in Germany at the time, was to take tours. I took battlefield tours, of which there are, if you go to Europe, it's fairly common thing. You can hire a guide who will take you to the battlefronts, which a lot of it is preserved. There's museums everywhere. There's just so much preserved about that time in France and Belgium. And so I did that twice. I went on two historian-led tours and got to go all over the place. And then I also did a tour that was actually a World War II based tour, but it covered a lot of the same area because it started in
Mhm.
Normandy. And of course, our story takes place in Rouen, which is the center of of Normandy. And so I got to visit Rouen. And while everybody's talking about World War II, I'm like focusing all the World War I stuff. But it was fascinating. And you can go and you can walk the streets and you can see the clock that Julie describes, and you can see it and feel it. And it is just the most amazing experience to be able to
That
do that. And I went down
that
the Seine
is,
River and I
yeah,
went to Monet's gardens, and like, of course, that is going in the book. Julia, because it wasn't that far from where they were. It was right between Paris and Rouen. And she went back and forth
exactly.
several times. There's no way she would not have known about it. So yeah, I
That's
got you in
right.
the book.
That's, I've never written historical fiction. So there's so much that intrigues me about it. How do you combine the fact and the fiction? How does that work in your head? What kind of a process do you use to do that? Like
Yeah.
you've got, I'm going to assume you've got all these facts. Fact. This happened. And then you weave in all this beautiful fiction. How do you do that? How do you just imagine, you just take them just like just like I would take a totally fictional character and weave a story for them. You do that with a real person.
Yeah, I
But
think
don't you feel a sense of responsibility to them to get it as right, to make it as, I guess, as true as what it could possibly be? I mean, as true meaning as honest, as
it's honest, yeah.
with their emotions, what they would feel. You have to really get to know them, don't you?
Right. And well, one of the things I love about historical fiction is, yes, we're dealing with facts, and in my case, not every case, of course, I'm dealing with real people who actually lived, and we know something about, but you have to be, I think, honest and true to who they were as you're making up the parts. And in my mind, the beauty of historical fiction is we get to make up sort of the fun parts. To me, the most
Yes.
interesting things about a story are, sometimes the beautiful scenery. What does it smell like? All the senses, the emotions, the dialogue. All these things are not really part of straight fiction, which I love, but it's a different thing altogether. But all those things, the sensory experience, the dialogue, the emotions, those are the fun things to me. Those are things that really bring me into a story. And
Yeah.
actually the scenes that I have to make up more because we don't know that much. We know, fact A happened in place B, and that's all we know. And I get to make up the rest. Well, that's, maybe I should just be writing straight fiction. but I love that, and you just, you let your imagination roam. You do your research, you draw from your own experiences, which I do quite a bit. There's sometimes something that happened in my own life that would cause certain, same emotions or same sensory experience or whatever,
Reaction.
something in common. And that's why I choose characters that I have something in common with, because then I can explore my own feelings and sort of project them on to the other characters in a positive way or a negative way. So it's really, like you're saying, yeah, I have kind of a structure, which is the fact, time, and I do try to stay faithful to that, unless there's, sometimes there's reasons where you have to vary some of the known facts, and that's why I always put in like an author's note. If I've changed the year or something that we know is factual, I explain that, because sometimes there's just a reason. You have a story arc, you are, building a story as you do in non-historical fiction. And, sometimes you have to change that. So I explain that, but that's how I do it, build in your facts. And at some point there, you do research. And, it's almost like nearly a year usually of research. But at some point you have to put that away. You know your facts, you know the arc, you know when basically things are going to happen. But then you need to create those scenes. You need to
Mhm.
be in those scenes, and you need to forget about the history book, and you need to just, you know, think it through and imagine and bring in all those things that make it real for the reader. And so you have to kind of put away the research at some point. I heard a saying that don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. So sometimes you have to do that. You have to you got to remember, this is fiction, this is a novel, and readers expect a novel with all the flourishes and
With,
emotions
yes,
and stuff that we love,
with the historical parts in it.
with historical
Do
points.
you do all of your research first and then start writing
Yeah, I
your
do.
book?
I don't do all of the research first. I do like a good part. I don't write a word until I have a pretty good idea of the
Mhm.
arc, how I'm going to write it, what person, who's the protagonist, the point of view, all that. I'm getting an idea of that as I'm reading the history, the letters or whatever I'm reading. I don't write anything until I have a good idea of the story. Then I start writing, and I'll make a list of the scenes, based on things that happened. I kind of think of, okay, well, I think this would be something that would be interesting to happen in Monet's garden, and there's usually,
Mhm.
a scene has to do many things. As you know, you're in a scene, but there's several things that have to be going. You have to be always moving the story forward. So I would imagine the scenes. Again, I haven't written a word, other than sort of
Mhm.
outlining. And so I have the scenes, and then I just, then I get into, I'm writing it. I'm just, I'm writing it sort of as it happens in real time. But that's sometimes when research comes back into the the mix, because, uh, say I want to write about them being, they're out going to the Combat Clearing Station, and they have to go through the countryside. Well, now I need to know exactly, what towns would they have been going through? What do those towns
Mhm.
look like? What is the industry there? In this area is pretty much all farming. If it's farming, what do they farm? What does that stuff
Mhm.
look like? What did the fields look like? What were
Exactly.
the dangers to the farmers? So now you have to go back, and you have to be sort of careful about those rabbit holes. But then I go back and research some more so that I can
Mhm.
bring realism
To fill in
to
those little spots.
fill in, yeah,
Yeah.
to fill in the scene.
So let me ask you this. In all of your research, did you discover anything that was really surprising to you?
Well, probably the first thing that surprised me was Marie Curie's role in World War One. I had no idea, and I thought I had read quite a bit about her, but everything that you read about her mostly is, of course, this discovery of radium and her Nobel prizes and her relationship with Pierre and Paul Langevin. And I knew all that basic stuff, but I somehow that period of time, because she wasn't doing research at that time, she couldn't.
Mhm.
Uh, Her radon was sconced away, and so that wouldn't be discovered by the enemy, and she wasn't able to do any research. But she did not stop doing what she was doing, and she, personally had trucks built with the X-ray machines, and personally went out to out. She was close to the front. She just,
Yeah.
fearless woman, just drove out there. Eventually, her daughter Irene was doing probably more of it even than she was, but she just took it upon herself to just go bring her inventions, her knowledge and technology out to the field and completely change things. There's no doubt that she saved many lives through the
Yes.
things, through the radiological capabilities they had, and that was a big surprise to me. So I knew that somehow she's going to have to be in the book. It was, and she's a
Yeah.
really interesting character. So
She is an amazing character. You need to write about her.
yes,
I
well,
would sign you up for that book.
yeah. And actually, she was, when I was considering. Hey, I just made up a new word. Considering protagonists, I thought about her, but there's already mostly a lot of children's books, but there are already so many books about her. So I like to
Mhm.
find people a little bit more obscure.
Yes. Well, you succeeded, but now many readers now know about Julia Stimson. I was looking her up. She's a very commanding presence.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Hence the first paragraph of the book.
Yes, yes, yes.
When I was trying to, put that together, I kept staring at, there's not that many photographs of her, but I kept staring at a certain one in particular. And she's so strong looking and so just powerful. And I have to say, kind of manly. She's just not
Yes,
a
I was,
feminine,
yeah,
frilly woman whatsoever. Just very, very strong, and this jaw, and she just looks so strong and powerful. And you got to think, was that a help or was that a hindrance to who she was and what she needed to do? I'm betting. I'm betting both. There's also a photograph that she is in a line with other men, all in uniform, and she is receiving the Distinguished Service Medal from none other but Black Jack Pershing, a very famous general, big guy, and she is head to head with him and all the other, and she's just. So just thought, it had to have an impact on her, being so different
yeah,
from the femininity of the day.
yes. And then there's Fred. I
Fred.
loved Fred.
Little Fred. Good. I'm glad. Well, from what I read about him, again, he's a real person, and there isn't that much written about him. And actually, one of the places I learned the most about him was his obituary that was printed by Harvard. I'm sorry, Harvard. And it just kind of went on and on about what just a great man he was and how beloved he was. And just his, and I think it even said he had this great sense of humor and just, was just sort of this all around likable guy, and was a football player and just very popular and beloved. And so I wanted to treat his character as such. I mean, I'd like to give all my characters a bit of an edge. No one's perfect, so
Oh,
hopefully
right.
I didn't paint him as a saint, because it's never my goal to do that. He had to have some quirks. He had to have some not so perfect moments.
Right.
But
And he
mostly,
did.
yeah, and
He
he did.
did have some not so perfect moments, but I
Yeah.
think he really loved Julia.
Yeah, oh,
In
yeah.
my mind, in your book, he loved Julia.
Oh, yeah.
And she loved him.
Yeah, and I think I think they actually did love each other.
I do.
They had a history together. There was letters, and you can't find letters back and forth to each other. I think I maybe found one or two, even though I know they existed, because other people's letters, had mentioned the two of them, and so it means they've probably been destroyed for for whatever reason, and she is mentioned, or he is mentioned in her letters to her father that appear in Finding Themselves very early on. And she's talking about, how wonderful he is and everybody loves him. And we had dinner, blah, blah, blah. And then it just sort of, they were still together, seeing each other every day. She was the chief nurse. He was the head of medicine. They saw each other every day, many, many times. And then it just sort of disappears, which always,
Yeah.
makes my little antenna go up. And I wanted to know what was going on.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Of course, I wanted them, to end up. I wanted the happily ever after story.
I did too. I know, and I couldn't do
though I
it.
don't write happily ever after, but I wanted that.
You
I
wanted
wanted that for Julia and Fred. It was, and which is interesting, because when you're a reader, you look at a book in an entirely different way than when you're the writer, which again is another fascinating thing.
Yeah.
So you told me that you do your research, and then you build your outline, and then you start creating your story and your characters. So how does that work in your day? Do you devote a certain amount of hours to your research and or writing, or do you do it as you can? What's your schedule like?
Yeah. Well, it's very time consuming, as you know. But with the Warners, I was a little bit more disciplined with my time than with the engineer's wife. When I was writing the engineer's wife, I was very, very obsessed, and I wrote 14, 16 hours a day and wrote. And then, but also it's my first novel, and a lot of things I was learning, and I had to redo many, many things. So it was just much more, I guess, yeah, a lot of spinning wheels, I guess, but it was learning. It was learning. So with the Warners, I had an imposed schedule because I had a contract already, and I knew how many months I had to get the first draft, the manuscript in, and so I was very disciplined about it. I knew how many words I need to have, so I gave myself, I think, 6 months straight research. I gave myself, 3 months to write the first draft, which works out to be 1,000 words a day. And I needed that time because then I had to have the time for editing after that. And so for that time, I basically started, first have the coffee, after coffee, check email, and usually by 9 a.m. I start writing. And then however long it took me to get my 1,000 words in is how long. And sometimes I'd be done by 4 or 5, but it was usually from about 9 to 6 straight writing to get my 1,000 words in. So then after that, the third phase where you're editing and rewriting, I really love that phase. I love that phase. And then
that's my favorite. Yeah,
that's my favorite. And then I would do it sort of as the spirit moved me. I mean, every day, but I'd work on different places. I would, I'd be out I'd do things like I'd take a walk or a ride or whatever, or you take a shower. That's when I'd get the ideas, and I sort of boom, that's when the inspiration hit. And then I'd go and work on, like, okay, I know why that scene isn't working, or, I know. And so that's really my very favorite part. Now, if I could get someone else to do that 3 months of first drafting, man, that'd be great. That's really hard.
I agree. That's also my very favorite part. So what are you going to do next?
Good question. Well, I have to actually be a little cagey because there's something in the works, but since the ink on the contract isn't dry yet, and that hasn't been announced publicly yet, but I will tell you that I will be writing another historical fiction novel featuring an American woman who's a little bit obscure, but who has a really, really interesting story that I think people will like to learn about. Just really, I can't tell you who it is yet.
Can you share the time frame?
The time frame is basically going to be mostly the Roaring 20s. So early, late teens, early 20s. So basically, sort of just jumping ahead in time again.
Yes,
I love that era.
Progressing. Yeah. What are you going to do when you get to current time?
No, I'm never going past the 60s. Then I think I'm going to go back. I'll probably go back to I think my readers will be done with me by then, and I will pick a different genre altogether.
So I've invited Becky on screen. So hopefully Becky has a question. So hopefully she will come on. I do see. Hey. I see a Barbara Stimson. I'm wondering if she is related.
Julia did have a sister named Barbara, I'm pretty sure. So maybe it's a descendant. Gosh. That would be really interesting.
Yes, that would. So did you meet any of her descendants?
I did not. Nope. I have not yet. I'm hoping to someday. And it's a fairly famous family. Julia's cousin, Henry Ward Stimson, was the Secretary of War for FDR. So during World War II. So
she was very famous. Connected. I was.
Her uncle was a famous, who's in the book a little bit, was a famous surgeon and started the Columbia University School of Medicine, I believe. I may be getting that not quite right, but very prominent family, very high expectations. So really interesting family.
Yes. So I sent Becky the invite. I'm not sure whether it worked or not, but in the meantime, I have a question from Helen. She would like to know, what unexpected discoveries did you make when searching for sources, and writing this book?
Well, I think the most impactful for me was seeing like battlefields. I actually went down into, because they have preserved them, down into the trenches where the doughboys were actually fighting, and just being able to be on that same ground with them was just amazing. And another thing I did was, at the time I was I think I was kind of in the middle of writing. I was already fairly well into the first draft. A documentary came out by Peter Jackson, and it was called "They Shall Not Grow Old." And what Peter Jackson had done was he took actual footage from World War One. Of course, it was very kind of herky-jerky, black and white, no sound. But he computer enhanced it so that it smoothed out the action, made it realistic. He colorized it. He got lip readers to look at what the soldiers were saying, and he created this documentary. And it brought to life. We've seen those film rolls, and it doesn't necessarily impact you so much, but this documentary, for several reasons, was a sort of a watershed event for me, because I felt like I was there, and I knew that that's what I needed to do in my writing, is really put the reader there. The other thing that was amazing, and on a personal note, is that I went to see this documentary with my son, who the veteran of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and served in a very dangerous profession. He was a bomb specialist, an IED specialist, who went and found the IEDs and blew them up, or other ways made them safe. So very, very dangerous occupation. And I went to see this movie with him. And even though it was 100 years ago, I could just see sort of him tensing. He's a very stable kind of guy, and nothing really bothers, but I could just see and sort of feel it affecting him, even that it was a movie. And so again, that really put upon me the drive to make this book as good as I could, as real as I could, as powerful emotionally as I could, and hopefully in some way I succeeded with that. Thank you for the question.
Excellent. And then we have a question from Becky, who unfortunately could not get on screen with us, but that's okay. I will ask your question, Becky. She says, as a fellow nurse, can you share what the most surprising medical fact was, and did you include or omit it in the book?
That's a good question. One of the things that I was surprised to find out about was where they were as far as giving blood. It was really in a big transitional phase. They had, for a long time, I mean, going back thousands of years, had learned to try to take blood directly from one person with the other patient right there, and just sort of person to person. But they didn't know about blood types and that kind of thing. So about 1 in 8 times it would work. But by the time of World War I, they had learned about basic blood typing and how to cross match and that type of thing. But they didn't, at the beginning of the war, they didn't really have a way to preserve the blood. You couldn't give it and then put it in a bag and then give it when they needed it, stick it in the fridge. What was happening is it would clot up. And, so basically it had to be done right then. But during the war, they did discover that if they treated the bottles with, I forget the exact chemical, but a citrate, that it would prevent it from clotting. That simple little thing changed everything. Because now, they could take healthy people and people from far away, not at the front, not people who are actually fighting the wars or taking care of patients, and have those people, participate and help by giving blood. And that fundamentally changed many, many things, changed things in surgery. So yeah, that did appear in the book.
Wow.
Good question. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Things we just take for granted. Yeah, you get blood, it goes in a bag, they squirt something in it, you put it in the freezer, 6 months later, you give it to somebody. Well, they didn't have that then.
That is fascinating. That was a great scene too, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, that was so
I love
good.
writing scenes is so much fun, and I was just kind of reading over, like, because now it's been a little while since I read or wrote this book. I better read this a little bit. And I have to say, some of those scenes are pretty good,
Wow.
especially the love scenes. Those are my favorite.
So this question is from Kelly. She says, once you began writing the book, how long would you say it took to finish the first draft? And then from there, how long to the final draft? And she says, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd say it was probably about 3 months straight research, about 3 or 4 months to write the first draft, and that was writing 1,000 words a day, and then a remaining 6 months or so editing, rewriting, sending it back and forth to my editor. So a little over a year plus, aside from very early research. So less than a year and a half, which is a lot less than it took me to write The Engineer's Wife. Thank you for the question.
So that was it from the audience questions. Barbara, did you have additional questions for
Oh, I
Tracy?
have a couple, but the first one I want to
good.
ask is how long did it take you to write The Engineer's Wife?
Oh my gosh. Probably the first draft and research and first draft, probably 2 years. And then
Okay.
another 5 years of rewriting and sending it out to critique partners and
Mhm.
really, learning so much of, I'd done a lot of writing, playwriting, screenwriting, short stories. I'd written articles, nonfiction. I'd written everything except a novel. And
Yeah.
and in between that, I was going to conferences and learning from so many others. So yeah, so 2 years researching and writing, and 5 years making it
Yeah.
into a novel.
So
Yeah.
say total of 7 years. Do you
Yeah,
think?
about
Is
7
that
years.
a fair?
That's probably, yeah. I think I started
Yeah.
it in
Yeah, which is
2012, and actually probably 2011, and then by 2018 I was pretty much done. And then no, it was before that. It was about 2016, I think I got an agent. But even after that, was continuing to improve and edit. So for another
Mhm.
a year or two after that, before we really started sending it out to editors. So
Yeah.
it all takes a lot of time,
It
a
does.
lot of patience.
A lot. It does. It does. It really does. And I don't think that's unusual for a first novel. I think, you were probably right there in the time frame that it might take for a first novel. I don't know. I know it took me about that much time.
Did
So
it really?
it did. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
That
And
makes me
it's
feel
like,
good.
yeah, no,
Like,
it
I've got
did.
a
In
steep
fact,
learning curve.
somebody asked me once how many revisions I did. And I said, oh, probably 20. And they were surprised, but no, it was probably even double that. But I just kept, I learned by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
But I do, because of what we've gone through in this past 18 months with COVID, did that affect at all your research and your writing about the Spanish flu and the outbreak? And
Yeah. Well,
how did
I was always going. It was going to be included in the story because it was a big part of the experience of World War One.
absolutely.
It was a huge development, but it wasn't going to be a major theme. And I had actually I was visiting my great uncle is buried in France. He died on November 9th, 1918, just 2 days before the war ended, and I went to see his grave in Meuse-Argonne, France. And while I was there in the museum, I discovered the story of Charlotte Cox, and a real nurse who died of influenza. So I had a character, and I knew I was going to work her into the story, and that's how I was going to basically address it through this character. But when COVID happened, I realized that we had parallels. There were things that, we could learn from, how they handled COVID. We could have similar experiences. Some of the things we were experiencing, maybe it would help us to cope, knowing that this this these people went through the same thing and survived and got stronger from it. So I wanted to include more about it because of what we were going through. And I also, in my research, I discovered that because a lot of this was kind of bubbling up due to COVID, there was a story in the paper about how Philadelphia and St. Louis actually handled the crisis very differently, especially in the beginning. Whereas St. Louis sort of shut everything down. And very limited contact. They just for a while just did just as we did. They shut things down, whereas Philadelphia really didn't. They had parades. They were raising money for the war effort, and they had parades with hundreds of thousands of people on the streets packed together watching, during this time. And Philadelphia had a much worse death rate than did St. Louis. And so, of course, I knew that part of the story was going to be in St. Louis. The hospital personnel was from St. Louis. And you got to know that there was information going back and forth between the war front and the people at home who were dealing with this crisis, because it really was appearing first on the war front, and they were sharing information. So therefore, I invented the character of Dr. Valentine to represent, now giving away too many spoilers probably, but to represent what they believed in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I actually, our local newspaper, because I live so close to Philadelphia, our local newspaper had a big article and pictures of during the Spanish flu in Philadelphia and all the people, and it was appalling, to see all those people together. Some writers had a hard time writing during this past 18 months with COVID. Yeah. How about you? Did you have a hard time, or were you able to just dig into your work?
It was kind of a mixed blessing. It did give me time where, otherwise I'd be off, footing it with a lot of social things, because I like to do that. And it would give me more concentrated, uninterrupted time to do that. At the same time, it was more difficult because I really missed that interaction. I missed, bouncing ideas off of people sort of in person. And I had to relearn basically, things like Zoom and stuff to do more things with technology that aren't my first preferred way to do things. So it was, a learning experience, but I did value the time. Although I have to say, well, I didn't have all the social events. I did have a husband who was home for the first time. For the first time, and mind you, he was an Army guy, always gone. So that was, as many others have found, that as an adjustment. I mean, I loved it. It was really cool. It's fun, but at the same time, I had to learn to put what he was doing out of my mind and sort of retrain him to know, even though it looks like I'm only playing on my iPad.
Yeah.
I know it just looks like Facebook, but I'm actually working here.
Yeah. I think that's hard for the people who live with us sometimes to understand what we do and how that whole process works. And I think, we'd be hard pressed to even explain it. It's just the way it is. But I know some writers really struggled with being able to work, and others did not. And I was curious as to how you handled what has turned out to be just mind-boggling. I think.
I have a word. I have a word I came up with to help my husband kind of understand, because he kind of expects, when he's working, he's got the headphones on, he's typing, he looks like he's working, whereas I might be staring at the at the ceiling or something. And sometimes he'd come and I'd just be, staring off to space. And he would start talking. And I had to explain to him, like, he says, well, I didn't think you were, it doesn't look like you're working. So I thought it was okay. And I had to tell him, well, sometimes, I'm a writer. Sometimes I'm writing. Sometimes I'm reading. And yeah, it's a novel or something, but this is still part of my work. But sometimes I'm percolating. And that's, and he just sort of learned that. Like, did you write today or did you percolate? Because it's a really important part, Usually I'd percolate out on a walk or something, but you just, I have to, my mind is putting together maybe a personal experience, that's something that happened to me or a loved one or something, with something that happened in history, with something that's happening with my character. And it's coming together in my brain. And yes, I'm staring at the ceiling, but I'm percolating. So that's a word that sort of helped us.
I like that word. That's a good word.
Yeah, I do too. That's great.
That is my gift to you.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to share one thing that was in the end of the book, Tracy, that just it just really struck me. Let's see if I can find it. I think it's in the author notes. You said, what lessons did 1918 apply to your own life? And you answered that just when things look the bleakest, change will come and some equilibrium will be restored. We ourselves will have grown and changed, become stronger and more resilient. And it was just so perfect at the end of, World War II and the pandemic. And that's how I feel now. I just feel very hopeful, and that we'll all be stronger and just look forward to getting together in person.
We are. And we'll appreciate it so much more.
Yes.
Right.
And other hugs. Don't you find the hugs? I just
don't want to let go.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
They are the best. But the good thing is that you are in Florida, Tracy, and we have you in Pennsylvania, Barbara. And I just thank you guys so much for joining us tonight and connecting with so many of your fans. So this is great.
It was delightful. I was just really pleased that you thought of me, because I've enjoyed this thoroughly.
Oh, good. And it's, again, it's one of the good things that has happened through all we've gone through, is there are more of these things going on. It wouldn't have occurred to me to do this before. And now, I get to see and more people and share my story with people that I wouldn't have. I always envision, going to book signings and you see people quick. But this is, it's pretty amazing. And I love seeing other authors, and it just makes me feel closer to them and closer to their stories. And I think it's a wonderful thing for books in the long term. Even though all we've gone through, we're like, oh my gosh, my book's coming out in the middle of the pandemic. I think in the long term, it's going to be, we'll have learned and grown, and adapted.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
Kick out of how relaxed the authors are, because you'd be playing with your dog or be outside, and then oh, it's time for my event, and everyone is so much more relaxed than when they're on book tour. It's like, all right, where am I now?
Yeah, right.
Well, I
still really want to do that. I still want to go.
I know.
I still want to do that. I'm going to show up there. I'm going to go up to Massachusetts. And
yes, please do. We would love to have you here.
Well, stop by for me, and we'll go.
And
up
I'll
together.
stop in Pennsylvania. You bet.
Yes,
I'm going to get on the road and just. But this has been wonderful, and thank you both so much. Thank you to our readers out there.
Fantastic.
And I hope you enjoyed the book.
Plates, Tracy.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah. I hope you sell out and need more. Let me know. I'll send you some more book plates. And
we have links to Barbara's
encourage
book.
people to write reviews. I know Barbara will agree with me about how important reviews are to us.
They really are.
Especially if they're positive. But if you have something positive, let us know. If it's something negative, something negative, let us know personally. And if it's something positive, let the world know.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's what I always say. If you love the book, tell everyone. If you have a problem with the book, come and tell me.
Tell me, because we can,
so that I can make the next one better.
Yeah.
It's important to know. And I think I think one thing we've learned, though, books will survive.
Yeah.
I think there's been worries, but I think there's no doubt books will survive. I think
Yes. And
because and bookstores.
Yes.
So
We've had
yeah,
so
well,
many
yes,
people supporting
bookstores.
bookstores instead of
Yes.
doing all their shopping online, realizing how important. And
Oh,
we do
yeah.
just so appreciate everyone supporting us and supporting our authors and supporting our events.
Absolutely.
Hopefully going back in person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, the dedication, and this is short, to the engineer's wife is to all the readers and all the writers, without whom all is lost. And I really believe that. That's what humanity is. If we didn't have it, we would not have humanity. The written word.
That's true.
And that's the perfect
That's
note to end
beautiful.
on. Thank you, Tracy. And thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. And enjoy the Warners. You're going to love it.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Can someone
we'll
get a
love it.
screenshot? Because I don't know how to do that. Can you do that,
Oh.
Kim? And
Oh,
send it to me? Because I never know how to do it.
Moment.
let me do one too.
I can do it
Everybody
on my
smile.
iPad.
Dang. Okay, I'm creating a clip. Hopefully that worked. Excellent. And I'm going to take. Excellent. Thank you so much. Hopefully
Thank you so much, lady. Really appreciate it. And
Yes. Thank you,
I will
Barbara.
be with both of you someday in person.
Thank you both. Yes,
Thank you.
anytime.
Okay.